Religionist, this week we're looking at part 2, if you will, of our Religions of China unit. And today we're going to look at the traditions of Master Kung, also known in the West as Confucianism. We know him as Confucius, for this is a Latinization of his name, but Kongzi, Master Kung, is arguably the most pivotal face of Chinese culture. On our unit in Taoism, we looked at China as the land of 3 religions, and we noted that people can be all 3 Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian at the same time. As the saying goes, one is born Taoist, that's your life. One lives life Confucianly in work and society. Finally, one dies a Buddhist as one gets ready for a possible next life. With this image again of the 3 vinegar tasters, we might remember Buddha thought the vinegar of life was sour, and therefore we need to leave society and the world of anxiety and troubles behind. For Confucius, the opposite. The world is bitter, and therefore everyone must do their part to keep chaos at bay in society. Finally, we may recall Lao Tzu thinks the vinegar of life is sweet no matter what happens. Nothing bad in the end can happen. We might briefly look at a few elements of pre-axial age culture in China. We remember the axial age is the middle of the first millennium, where we see the greats like Socrates, the Buddha, Mahavir of Jainism, Confucius, Lao Tzu, the prophet Isaiah, all emerge at about the same time in human history. But if we go back to that Yellow River civilization, we'll see that there's a kind of Adam and Eve type couple, if you will, Fuxi and Nuwa, who, after a devastating flood, I think that might sound familiar, repopulate the earth and recreate civilization, and most importantly invent the 8 trigrams. The 8 trigrams surrounding the yin-yang, or taiji more properly called, represent the fullness of harmony and balance. The seasons, winter, summer, spring, fall, everything one could think of is contained within the all-encompassing framework of these ancient 8 trigrams. So important we'll even see it as the flag of South Korea. One thing we can say about China is its writing system does not come from Sumer Babylon like all the other alphabetical systems, just about all of them. In fact, it is unique and pictographic, they say, writing with pictures. Even our alphabet started with the writing of pictures, so we may remember the aleph is an ox, so our letter A is an ox head, upside down, if you will. So here's a visual example of some oracle bone writing from the most ancient period of Chinese history during the Yellow River civilization. Chinese history is marked by a period of historical epochs. We can call them dynasties, and the first of these, the Xia dynasty, once thought mythical, now we find evidence it really existed, not only in the writings of later Chinese authors. So from around 2000 BCE, and even earlier, China is underway with developing civilization and the agriculture which fuels it. So here we see the famous Taiji associated with Taoism, but properly belonging really to Taoism and Confucianism and really all of Chinese culture. Even Buddhists will pick up this imagery. And next to it we see the symbol for Confucianism, which is in fact a central river with tributaries feeding into it. We'll see that Confucian culture establishes a hierarchy and sees hierarchy as part of the natural order of things, quite the opposite of the Taoist perspective. And so we can look at the central river as the emperor. The figure of the emperor in Chinese culture looms large as the figure of Jehovah does for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. So once again, the ancestor of the Han Chinese, as opposed to the 4 other significant ethnic underrepresented peoples, is the Yellow Emperor. With Master Kung, we know him through his famous Analects, the wise sayings of, well, Confucius say, we say in American culture. We know Confucius mostly through the Analects, his writings, his sayings, his observations. Written during the Warring States period, Confucius emerges during a period of tumultuous chaos in Chinese culture. And so, like our other superheroes of the other religions, Confucius wants peace. But it's not the inner peace of the Buddha. It's not the peace through love of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ. It is a peace through good government and bureaucracy becomes the clergy in this religion. So Confucianism is centered around social hierarchies and maintaining the social order to preserve society from the chaos of war and warlord rule. We can say of the religions of Asia, Buddhism and Confucianism are the most opposed, yet still they blend. Buddha, as we recall, was anti-family, anti-politics. His monks weren't allowed to be politicians. And he was against social hierarchies of any kind, declaring them to be illusory projections of the social mind. So we'll see Buddhism and Confucianism will conflict in China, even as though they coexist also oddly harmoniously. So if Taoism is a preference for nature and doing what feels right to do, Confucianism is all about subduing violent tendencies to live peacefully and harmoniously in society. It is the classic nature Taoism and nurture Confucianism debate in ancient China. I think it's important to state that, oddly enough, this man, Confucius, Master Kong, who so transforms the shape of Chinese culture, being one of Erik Erikson's great men of history, in fact, was raised by a poor, hardworking single mother. She recognized the genius of her son and made sure to work extra hard, as did Confucius himself, to make enough money for him to afford an education. So oddly enough, one of the arguably most patriarchal of religions also is most dependent, I would argue, on a mother for its birth. Also surprising for students are the religions without gods. And this is one of them, maybe the least godful of all. Master Kong's famous phrase, "I speak not of divine things, but human things," points to the immanental or this worldly character of his tradition. He didn't think it's bad to believe in ancestral spirits and the like, but he didn't think it was going to help society much if we do that. For Confucius, families were golden concentric rings throughout society. The whole of society is one enormous organism. And we can say the bureaucracy and academia itself serves as the religious focus. So teachers and bureaucrats then are the clergy of this religion, highly trained people aiming to keep society in peace and stifling unrest through capable leadership. It's an odd parallel between Lao Tzu, who was an administrative official and chucked it all to go into the woods and claimed it all was a fake, and Confucius, who only for 1 year was hired as an administrative official, and during that year he performed miracles. But it didn't involve bringing anyone back from the dead, I'm afraid. His miracles were in the year he ruled the province of Lu. No one, believe it or not, stole or lied. Everyone had health care, and he deployed state food supplies to ensure that the elderly and children did not starve. So that is the kind of man Confucius was, and those are the biggest miracles you get. We can say they're not much of a miracle, but we can say they are visible miracles. We can see them in this world. So Confucius wandered the countryside begging government officials to listen to his new order for society with very little success. He died unrenowned in his time, and even on occasion there were death threats issued for him. So here we have one of his famous sayings, that the people will behave if you put penalties on them and enforce them with injunctions and punishments and the like, but better than that is a populace who emulate a virtuous ruler in the form of the emperor. For him, the emperor is the symbol of the whole society. If the emperor is virtuous, the people will model that virtue, and if the emperor is corrupt, then the heavens will overthrow that emperor, and for Confucius, that emperor should be gone, as should as well down the hierarchy abusive parents and the like. So those Confucian scholars I've met who don't consider Confucianism a religion, but rather a secular ethical tradition, the big question is, does Confucianism serve as a sacred canopy, and in our definitions of religion, a primary worldview that dictates thoughts and actions, and a glue, a canopy for whole peoples? In this sense, I think we count Confucianism as a religion as we did our other godless religions, Jainism and Taoism. So Confucian ethics is centered around the principle of reciprocity, or shu. And this means that I as a parent owe guidance to my children, and they in turn owe obedience to me if I am a good guide. If I get a present from someone, I really should give them a present as well. This is all about mutual respect and the recognition of the value of both parties. But while we see in Taoism an inherent equality of male and female and all the other polarities of our world, in Confucianism we see an inherent inequality. Husbands should guide wives, and wives should obey husbands, and on up the ladder, and we'll look at the 5 relationships shortly. But in no wise did Confucius think that people were inherently equals. Some were clearly equipped with intelligence to be able administrators, and a smart, hard-working young boy, sorry, no women yet in China, could become one of the highest of administrators. After 12 to 25 years of intense government study, Confucian exams are taken, and then anyone from any class can excel and make it to the top of Confucian tradition. In this sense, Confucianism is very unlike the caste system's inequality, where we're just stuck in our caste till the next life. Like all our axial age figures, Confucius has in this idea of reciprocity, do unto others as you want others to do unto you. This golden rule is found across really the axial age world of the middle of the first millennium BCE. And so for Confucius, when we think, what does it mean to be saved? It really just means to be the perfect gentleman, humble, hardworking, respectful, and the kind of person who doesn't mind if people don't talk to them at the party. Show-offy, attention-getting behavior is frowned upon for a gentleman in Confucian tradition. And so we'll even see in the family the emphasis on the importance of the number one son. You can see our Charlie Chan movies are full of stereotypes, but when Charlie Chan says, "Number one son, pick up the phone," actually doesn't have to say that. Number one son already anticipates his father's wishes. I once knew a Chinese woman who had converted to Christianity. I asked her why. She said, "Well, my father was such a stern, strict Confucian fellow that no matter what I did, I never measured up to his expectations." And she said, "When I found Christianity, on the other hand, I found a father who would love me in spite of my faults, even in part because of them. And no matter what I did, I was loved and accepted." So there's a real contrast between Christianity and Confucianism. Oh, I will argue a big one. And Islam and Christianity look like kissing cousins, if not brothers, compared to Confucianism. And so how does the hierarchy work? We can look at the top. That's the emperor, as close to God as we're going to get with Master Kong. We think about it. Americans follow their presidents. Really every country follows their leaders very meticulously. They're the ones in the papers and on the posters and the like. And so for Confucius, everyone must do their job and all will be well. Parents must be parents, he said. It's a disaster when the kid's in charge. I've seen that more than a few times in my experience in America. More controversial in this period of time would be the idea that wives should obey husbands. The husband's supposed to be a good guide. The wife can leave him if he's not, or if he's abusive. On the other hand, the wife is supposed to obey the husband. Confucius even had the idea of separate sides of the street for men and women. Well, that didn't catch on, did it? But historically, in some Confucian cultures, women walked behind their husband by 3 paces. And so, parent to child, husband to wife, and then older sibling to younger sibling. Of course, that hierarchy is topped out by the old number one son, even if he has an older sister. But beyond that, Confucianism privileges age. If we think of American leaders, Obama, Bush, Clinton, we like those handsome young fellows. But in China, we can look at Deng Xiaoping and Mao Zedong, and we see men ruling even beyond sanity. We see men ruling even into senility. That's how much respect there is for gerontocracy, rule by the aged. And the only equal relationship among the five is that of friend to friend. And supervisors should never be friends with the people they supervise. That includes professors being friends with students. He thought that disrupts the relationship of the hierarchy and threatens to crumble the edifice of authority and control that legitimates the positions people have in society, to the point where teachers wore special hats and government administrators and the like to denote for the people at large their important jobs in society. And they were the go-to people for questions. So as part of reinforcing the social hierarchies and keeping everyone in their place, we see in China the use of the bow as a way of emphasizing that. When our President Barack Obama bowed low to the Japanese Prime Minister, he was essentially saying that Japan was superior to the United States. So, one should bow more lowly than the superior if one is a junior, and vice versa. The superior will see the top of your head. If it's the emperor, then the peasant better throw their whole bodies down on the ground as his carriage passes. And so along with all this, being saved, being the perfect gentleman, means attaining a state of moral perfection. That is heaven for Confucius. And the sacred society is not saints and the like, or bodhisattvas, or Hindu gods. It is rather the sacred ancestors whose names have been written down historically on the tablets of each Chinese family. And to be remembered as an honorable ancestor, that was your immortality. And then for a religion so godless, it's a religion, I would say, most replete with elaborate rituals. I can hardly think even of the Catholic Church or Hindu religion being more filled with rituals that establish one's place in society than Confucianism. So honesty, loyalty, these are of central importance in Chinese character. Loyalty to friends and your superiors supersedes all other concerns. We can think of a Confucian aspect of the samurai. When they disappointed their master, they would even commit seppuku, or ritual suicide, putting a knife in their belly as the sign of their dishonoring their master. So as we think about the idea of law in the West, in European societies and Islamic societies, it's all based on biblical law going back to Moses. But for Confucian societies, justice is in the hands of the well-trained, hopefully fair-minded, capable government administrator. The Mandarin, oddly enough, a Sanskrit term meaning basically to give orders. And so if we're trying to figure out Chinese society and attain the global awareness competencies, we can see in East Asia the professor's still a feared individual. Everyone rises when the professor comes in, and there's no hide there, Jim kind of behavior. If the scholar be not grave, he will not inspire respect. I had a business student tell me once they did a study, and the severe, stern administrators got 15% more work out of workers, and the nice ones got 20% less work out of workers. So this is one religion where we can see it clearly functions in society and governs about a third of the Eurasian continent. So as Buddhism moves in from Asia along the Silk Road and the South China Sea trade through merchants and traveling monks, it enters China and permeates it, to be greeted by the Taoists, who think it's some kind of new form of Taoist religion founded by a reincarnation of Lao Tzu, no kidding. But as centuries passed, the Confucian elements of society become deeply concerned. Because what is the value of building lavish monasteries, statues, arts, all the things this religion of images, as the Chinese called Buddhism, represented? Buddha thought the family was the source of 1,000 sorrows, and again Confucius thought of the family as concentric rings of golden circles. The family was the basis of society. If families fall apart, society crumbles. And so as Buddhism has a heyday, a peak period up through the 6th century with the rule of the Empress Wu, and as it has represented wherever it goes, liberation for women from household life, there is a clampdown in 842 to 845. 30,000 monks are forced back into the labor market. Tens and tens of thousands of monasteries are destroyed as Emperor Wuzong puts Buddhism down. For a bit, Buddhism will appeal to the peasants. And after the persecution, the fancy Buddhisms, if you will, of the lavish monasteries and the elaborate philosophies are largely gone or dissipated, leaving only the Chan Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, and the rest largely die out in influence. There are, of course, other significant thinkers in China. We can think of Mao Zedong, who thought, this may sound familiar, that the universe was governed through love itself. Love was the source of all things, and love was what maintained the world in existence. But that's a minority view. And then we also have the view of Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, so popular among American businessmen. But the real key there is how to avoid a war. Sun Tzu shows how win-win situations arise when people are grown-ups and make decisions that benefit both parties rather than fight ridiculous and devastating wars. This struggle between people's movements, like Pure Land Buddhism for the peasants who believe in infinite light Buddha, and when they die they go to his heaven, if you will. We'll talk about that more in the next unit. But the peasant movements reappear in Chinese culture. It is a yin and yang balance between aristocracy and educated elite versus the mass of peasants. When we look at Chairman Mao Zedong, we see the son of a devout Buddhist mother of that Pure Land tradition. And we see him import Marxism as a way to restore power to the people. But since his death and these chaotic times China endured through the period of Western colonialism, Confucius is back. And the Chinese government is pushing Confucius centers around the planet to teach Chinese and Chinese culture. I once asked an economy grad student from the University of Beijing, what do you think of Chairman Mao these days? He said, well, Mao was good for his time, but his time is past. And I said, what about Master Kong, Confucius? And his face lit up and said, Master Kong, that's who we're all looking at again today. I remember my own father, born in 1915, and his picture of China was that of vast, starving millions of people. And today, the richest country on the planet, I like to tell people China is our landlord now. How did they get there? It was through Confucianism. How were they so devastated throughout the 19th and 20th centuries? We can see on this map how China was sliced up and carved into bits by the French, the British, Germans, and even Russians and the Japanese. Each got their big slice of China. Britain fought 3 opium wars against China, and these were wars to force the Chinese to import Britain's opium in exchange for China's silver. And the addiction levels were so great and British weapons so powerful, the Chinese were rendered helpless at that point, as the Manchu Empire is slowly dying. It's not until 1911 Sun Yat-sen will declare China a democracy. That's even as well when the Chinese long hairdo, the queue as they call it, everyone cut them off in the government, and then that soon ensued later, as China becomes forced to become westernized by this brutal invasion. We'll see a brief attempt to overthrow these empires' invasion of their country in the Boxer Rebellion, led not by boxers but by kung fu fighters. The British didn't really know what other word to use for these guys, but when it comes to hands against guns, I think we know who wins that one. Nevertheless, the last odd thing to note, we think today of protests by Tibetans, even immolations, burning themselves alive to protest Chinese occupying their land, and the Manchu and the Mongols. These northern barbarians surrounding the Han Chinese, as we discussed in the Taoist unit, have actually ruled China for more of the last millennium than the Han Chinese have ruled themselves. So it's always a back and forth in China between the so-called barbarians and the Han civilized Chinese, between Buddhism and Confucianism, and also between the elite, the aristocrats, also between the elite, the aristocrats, and the peasants. We see that in all cultures. But in the end, Master Kong becomes the cultural face of China. And his system has proven so effective for these 2.5 millennia. Believe it or not, there are people who trace their ancestry directly back to Master Kong. 70 generations in one case. So social stability is really the hallmark of Confucianism, and the human being who is humble, hardworking again, and obedient to their supervisors and giving good guidance to their juniors, to the point that once I was a year ahead of a Korean friend of mine. He always insisted I go through the door first. I, as an American, found that rather strange and inegalitarian. So one day I said to him, well, if I'm your senior, then I could order you to go through the door first, couldn't I? And he said, yes. And I said, well, you go through the door first then. So I thought, wow, such enormous power simply from having been around longer and knowing a bit more than my junior. So we can see China's become an economic powerhouse and more a cultural powerhouse. And that's only going to continue, but hopefully this video lecture will open your minds to some of the key features why that has happened.